Hi, it's Katrina. My friend David is going to be helping me out with the voiceover today, so I hope you enjoy.
Number 10. Severed hands. Archaeologists in Egypt came across 3 pits in the court of a palace from the 15th dynasty, which was between 1640 and 1530 BC. The palace is located at the site of Tel el-Daba in the northeastern section of the country, and inside the 3 pits were 12 severed human hands. Experts believe the severed hands are evidence of a bizarre practice known as the Gold of Honor. This was one of the more barbaric practices of ancient Egypt. When soldiers returned from battle, they often presented the hands of slain enemies to the pharaoh. The hands were like war trophies, but Egyptians also believed that without the hands still attached to the body, a dead person couldn't pass into the afterlife. Severing the hand was a way for the victor to ensure their enemy was deprived of eternal salvation. The pharaoh would be so impressed with the ghoulish body parts that he'd bestow gifts upon the soldiers like trinkets of gold. After the initial discovery, there was a bit of a debate between scholars. Some suggested that the hands may have been amputated limbs from punishments. However, researchers say there's no reference anywhere of the Egyptians cutting off the hands of criminals. The team of archaeologists behind the discovery from the German Archaeological Institute believe this is distinct evidence of the Gold of Honor ceremony. And now for number 9. But first I wanted to give a big shout out to Kelly Self 2744 and Erica Russell 1142. Thanks so much for watching and supporting OE. If you're new here, be sure to subscribe and join the family. Number 9. The Skull Tower. At its height over 500 years ago, Tenochtitlan was one of the biggest cities in the Americas. It once had a population of over 200,000, but in the 16th century, it fell to the Spanish conquistadors. When the city fell, the Spanish destroyed the Aztec capital. They crushed pyramids to dust and tore down temples. Then they built churches over the ruins of the old Aztec culture. But not everything has been lost. Sometimes an old relic appears from the depths of Mexico City, and one of the most recent discoveries was an entire tower made of human skulls. When the Spanish arrived in 1521, they were appalled by the things they saw in Tenochtitlan. Specifically, the practice of human sacrifice. They watched in horror as priests cut the beating hearts from their victims and offered them to the gods. And in their chronicles, conquistadors described megalithic towers surrounding the central temple made up of human skulls. Many modern historians dismiss these tales as embellishments. But recently, at the Templo Maya site in Mexico's historic center, archaeologists found one of those very skull towers. It dates back to the 1400s and includes the skulls of men, women, and children. So it looks like the stories were true. The Aztec did build pyramids and towers built entirely of human skulls. Archaeologists have already found over 600 skulls around the temple. They think that at some point there may have been 7 monumental structures built from human heads surrounding Templo Maya, and before it was torn down, the skull tower likely stood about 15 feet tall. Number 8. Sweaty Greeks. How would you like to have your very own jar of sweat and grime from a bodybuilder? That sounds a little creepy, right? But if you lived in ancient Greece or Rome, a jar of human sweat could be worth a lot of money. One of the favorite tools of the Greeks and Romans was the strigil. It was normally made of bronze, but it could also be crafted from tin or silver. Before doing exercise or using a public bath, men would have their slaves use the curved metal blade of the strigil to scrape off oil, sweat, and dirt. Then all of this bodily grime would be collected. Many people believed exfoliated body slime had healing properties, but only if it came from the body of somebody athletic. The Greeks were very specific over whose grime they were coveting. The rancid mixture was called gloios, and according to Bill Hayes, who wrote a book on the history of exercise, people were so desperate for gloios that they'd scrape it off the walls where shirtless athletes had been leaning. This stuff would then be sold to rich women who used it as a facial cream. They would then rub the sweat and excreted oil of a gladiator all over their face to keep themselves looking young. There's a bronze Roman strigil on display at the Science Museum in London. It's extremely corroded, but was once a shining tool for collecting grime. In the Gymnasium of Berea, an ancient athletic center from the 2nd century BC in Macedonia, archaeologists found an inscription. The inscription details the sale of gloios to fund a local security detail to keep the gymnasium safe. The evidence is there, so as disgusting as it sounds, Greeks really did rub themselves in body sweat. Number 7. Creepy Viking stone. During work on a railway project in Sweden, archaeologists found something extremely creepy. The first thing they found was a burial from the Iron Age, and this caused the work to cease while archaeologists conducted an investigation. Then they found a massive phallic stone right next to one of the gravestones. It's a giant stone that's carved in the likeness of the male reproductive organ. It's about 1.5 feet tall and was brought to the burial ground from a nearby quarry. In an interview, archaeologist Rebecca Johnson said at first glance it looks like an ordinary standing stone. It's only when you look closely that you can see the elements that make it an obvious phallus. Mind you, it was crafted over 1,000 years ago in the Viking Age, so it's been eroded enough to almost erase its finer details. But what is this creepy rock doing next to an ancient Viking grave? That's the big question scientists want to answer. These types of things might be common to find in Rome, where people wore phallic pendants for good luck and drew them on their walls. But phallic objects are a little more unusual in Sweden. The Norse god Freyr was associated with peace and pleasure, and there was a great statue of him in the same shape at the Temple of Uppsala. Maybe the deceased had some connection to the god, but scientists can't say for sure why the stone is there. Number 6. The shocking discovery of San Esteban de Araste. At the beginning of the Spanish Civil War in the summer of 1936, Lourdes Malón Pueyo was executed. She was shot dead by the Phalangists as she tried to flee the right-wing soldiers. Her sister, Rosario, died later that same day, inside a cave where she was trying to take shelter. The crime of Rosario and Lourdes was that they'd embroidered a Republican flag in northern Spain. Almost a century later, archaeologists went in search of the skeletal remains of the two young women. They conducted 5 expeditions between 2013 and 2020, and Rosario's body was found in 2017. As they searched for the remains of Lourdes, the archaeologists found something shocking. They accidentally uncovered the ruins of a medieval monastery and a Visigothic tomb. Near the vicinity where both sisters were murdered, a shrine from the 18th century dedicated to Saint Dominic was uncovered. Then the archaeologists dug up a Visigothic tomb containing the body of a young man who died around the year 475 AD. There was also a trash heap found full of ceramic fragments, shattered glass, and animal bones. But the most impressive find was the monastery of San Esteban de Araste. It was built around 1039 AD, but was later destroyed. And archaeologists never knew where it was until they started digging around for the corpse of the woman killed in the Spanish Civil War. Number 5. The Blood Ritual. In Guatemala 500 years ago, blood was spilled at a remote Maya temple. Sacrificial blood was gushed out of a person to feed their life force to the gods. At an ancient temple in the jungle city of Zacpeten, archaeologists discovered a series of arrowheads. The arrowheads were covered in human blood, but they likely weren't fired from a bow into an enemy. Instead, they appear to have been used in part of a bloodletting ceremony. The arrowheads were made from extremely sharp black volcanic glass. Researchers believe the arrowheads were then used to spill blood from a vital area of the victim. Their ears may have been cut, or perhaps their tongue, and scientists even say they may have wounded their private parts to release the blood. Unlike some who faced ritual sacrifice in ancient Mesoamerica, whoever spilled their blood in this instance did so voluntarily. They also survived, which must have been nice. Prudence Rice from Southern Illinois University says the general consensus is that bloodletting was a fairly common ceremony for the Maya. It was about as common for them as giving blood is for us today. The idea was that they fed the gods human energy as a way to keep them satisfied, and it was also done at coming-of-age ceremonies. But bloodletting was mostly used as a way to connect a person's life force to their ancestors. What other places around the globe do you think bloodletting was practiced during ancient times? Let us know your thoughts down below, and while you're at it, subscribe. Number 4. The root of all evil. Scientists believe they may have just discovered the root of all evil. And no, it isn't money. A group of researchers believe this spiritual concept of evil originated early on in the human imagination. And according to them, it may have stemmed from primitive attempts to understand infectious disease. Believing evil forces are responsible for diseases was a global trend prior to the middle of the 19th century. Before germ theory became accepted science, most people thought malevolent spirits were the cause of their illnesses. Although science has progressed, the days of superstition are far from over. When researchers looked at geographic regions with high rates of disease and mortality, they found something interesting. Where more people are getting sick, there's a stronger conviction that the sickness is caused by demons. There also happens to be a higher belief in witches and evil spirits. Researchers looked back through history as well. They found that when something like a pandemic broke out, there was a subsequent rise in fear of demons and all things spooky. For example, after the Black Death was a surge of witch hunts in medieval Europe. Brock Bastian from the University of Melbourne said that historically belief in evil spirits likely evolved to explain the effects of pathogens. Bastian went on to say that knowing this could help to understand the origins of religion itself. As humans began to fear the demons that made them sick, they came up with gods to protect them. And this was likely how the first major religions in the prehistoric world started. During the investigation, researchers looked at archived data from 58,000 people spread across 50 countries in the late 1990s. The data recorded the social class, political orientation, and education level of those who participated, and the results showed that the people who lived in places where infectious diseases were more rampant were far more likely to believe in the devil. Number 3. The Agory Monks. The Agory Monks perform chilling rituals to this very day. They're an extreme religious sect of Hinduism known for going through fantastic lengths to achieve their idea of purity. The belief of the Agory is that all things are pure, no matter how disgusting or creepy it might seem to everyone else. Their views are so strange that mainstream Hinduism has universally denounced them, and one of the rituals they practice is cannibalism. One of the main staples of Hinduism is reincarnation. The Agory also believe in reincarnation, only they want to break the cycle. They're devoted to the Hindu god Shiva and believe it's their mission to break the unending cycle of reincarnation and reach transcendence. They embrace death and reject the customs of the world. This group also searches out recently deceased corpses, often pulling them from the river. Then they eat the body and use the bones for creating pieces of jewelry. They turn heads into bowls and smaller bones into trinkets. Another belief of the Agory is that for them to transcend to the next physical plane, they must be covered in death. They gather human ashes from cremation grounds and keep them smeared over their bodies. They believe this act brings them closer to Lord Shiva. They are truly one of the last remaining death cults in the world. And although they seek supreme enlightenment, they do it by covering themselves in human ashes and eating dead bodies. Number 2. Headless Vampires. An unbelievably horrific mass graveyard was just unearthed in northern Poland. Workers in the small village of Luzino were doing road construction when they stumbled upon a burial ground near an 18th century church. Over 450 bodies were uncovered from the graveyard, and most of them were afflicted by the vampire's curse. The bodies had already been exhumed, then reburied, and experts are saying the family members likely dug up the bodies of deceased loved ones specifically to remove their heads. Then they reburied them, hoping the post-mortem decapitation got rid of the vampire's curse. Many of the decapitated bodies had their heads stuck between their legs. A coin was also placed in their mouth to pay for passage into the afterlife. These are obvious signs of vampire burials. The lead excavator, Maciej Stromski, said that about 30% of the recently discovered bodies also had bricks next to their heads and limbs. It's very likely the local population came down with a bad case of paranoia. They must have thought their graveyard was full of potential vampires and dug up the bodies just to be sure. Then they put them back in the ground without their heads. Number 1. Together in Death. Archaeologists from Armenia and Poland have been excavating the ancient site of Metsamor for about a decade. The city was part of the Urartu Empire, which dominated large parts of Turkey, Iraq, Iran, and Armenia. It was continuously inhabited starting around the 17th century BC, then it was destroyed sometime around the 4th century BC when the nomadic Scythians showed up. But even after 10 years of research, there's almost nothing known about the people who lived in Metsamor. They left no written accounts of themselves behind, but artifacts suggest a thriving society. Although these objects don't offer many specific details about the city's ancient inhabitants. One of the most interesting recent discoveries is that of a creepy yet somehow romantic burial. Researchers found a tomb with the physical remains of a couple inside. Expedition director Dr. Krzysztof Jakubiak said in a press release that the people likely died simultaneously. Then they were both placed in the tomb, where their bodies could rot together, and they were sealed in that tomb for 3,200 years. Would you ever consider sharing your final resting place with someone else? Let us know in the comments below. And if you liked this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.